All right, buckle up, everybody, because today we're diving headfirst into the book of Matthew.
The book of
You
Matthew.
know that book that kicks off the New Testament?
It's a big one?
Oh, it's a big one. And it's way more than just a bunch of stories strung together.
Right.
We're talking about a bridge, a connection between the old and the new.
A bridge between the Old and New Testaments. Absolutely.
So if you want to understand what Jesus is all about,
This is it.
Matthew is your go-to guide.
That's right.
And today, we're going to unpack it all.
We've got the genealogy, the teachings, the miracles.
Don't forget those parables.
Oh, and the parables, definitely. Those are always fun to unpack.
We're going to hit all the highlights, and by the time we're done,
Still be a Matthew master.
you'll be a Matthew master, ready to impress your friends with your biblical knowledge.
Or at least have a better understanding of this amazing gospel.
Exactly. So let's jump right in.
Great.
The book of Matthew, it doesn't mess around. It starts with a bang. And I'm talking about that genealogy.
Oh, yeah, the genealogy.
A whole list of names tracing Jesus's family tree all the way back.
All the way back to Abraham. Can you believe it?
Abraham, like the Abraham.
The one and only.
That's going way, way back.
It is. It's making a statement right from the start.
What kind of statement?
Well, it's connecting Jesus to the great heroes of the faith.
The OGs of the Bible.
You could say that, showing that he's part of this grand story, this incredible lineage.
It's like Matthew saying, hey, this Jesus guy, he's not just some random dude who popped up out of nowhere.
Exactly. He's the fulfillment of prophecy, the one who's been promised for generations.
So right off the bat, we're talking about destiny, about purpose, about a plan that's been in motion for centuries.
That's Matthew for you, always thinking big picture.
Okay, I'm with you, but then things get a little, well, let's say unconventional with the whole virgin birth story.
Ah, yes. The virgin birth.
I mean, it's a pretty wild concept when you really think about it.
It is a bit out there, I'll give you that.
It's right there at the beginning of Matthew.
Front and center and for a reason.
What's the reason?
Well, it's emphasizing Jesus's divine origin, showing that he's not just an ordinary human being.
So he's more than just a man.
He's the Son of God, sent from heaven to earth.
And then we have those mysterious magi showing up, following a star.
Those guys always intrigued me.
Who are those guys, really?
Well, they're wise men, astrologers from the East.
Like some kind of ancient astronomers.
Exactly. They're searching for the newborn king, the one the prophecies foretold.
So they represent something bigger than just three guys with gifts.
They do. They symbolize the way Jesus's message would eventually reach beyond Israel, to all the nations of the world.
So right there, we're seeing the seeds of a global movement being planted.
That's exactly it. Matthew is hinting at the worldwide impact Jesus will have.
It's like a preview of what's to come. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's talk about Jesus' ministry, the stuff he actually did.
Oh, where do we even begin?
I know, right? It's packed with action, with teaching, with miracle.
It's like watching a highlight reel of the most amazing life ever lived.
So what were some of the key moments, the things that really stand out to you?
Well, for me, it starts with the baptism, where John the Baptist dunks Jesus in the Jordan River.
That seems like a pretty big deal.
It is. It's like a public declaration of Jesus's mission, a symbolic washing away of sin, a new beginning.
And then right after that, he goes into the wilderness.
40 days and 40 nights, tempted by the devil himself.
Talk about trial by fire.
It was, but Jesus resisted every temptation, showing his strength, his resolve, his commitment to doing things God's way.
And it's after that he starts gathering his crew, his disciples.
Those 12 guys who would become his closest followers, his inner circle.
So we've got the baptism, the temptation, the calling of the disciples.
All essential parts of Jesus's preparation for his public ministry.
It's like he's getting ready to launch something big.
He is. And that something big includes some of the most radical teaching the world has ever heard.
I'm thinking about the Sermon on the Mount.
The Sermon on the Mount. That's a game changer.
It's chock full of wisdom, of challenging ideas, of stuff that makes you really think.
It does. It's not just about following rules. It's about transforming your heart.
So what are some of the key takeaways, the things that really make the Sermon on the Mount so radical?
Well, for starters, Jesus talks about loving your enemies.
Loving your enemies. That's a tough one.
It is, but it goes against everything we're naturally inclined to do.
Right, we're wired to fight back, to get even.
But Jesus is saying, no, rise above that, break the cycle of violence, show compassion even to those who hurt you.
That's a pretty tall order.
It is, but it's the kind of radical love that can change the world.
And then there's that whole thing about turning the other cheek.
Oh yeah, that one's a classic.
Don't retaliate, don't seek revenge.
Instead, absorb the blow, offer forgiveness, break the chain of hate.
Easier said than done, for sure.
Definitely. But that's the power of the Sermon on the Mount. It challenges us to live differently, to be better than we think we can be.
Okay, I'm starting to see why it's so revolutionary. But it's not just about lofty ideals, right?
Yeah.
Jesus also gets down to earth with those parables.
Oh, the parables, they're like little stories with big meanings.
And Matthew's got a bunch of them that are unique to his gospel.
He does, like the parable of the talents.
That's the one where the master gives his servants different amounts of money. Right?
Talents, they're called talents, and it's about what they do with those talents.
Do they bury them in the ground? Or do they invest them and make them grow?
Exactly. It's a challenge to use our God-given gifts, our abilities, our resources to make a difference in the world.
Don't just sit on your potential. Put it to work.
That's the message. Don't waste what you've been given. Multiply it, share it, use it for good.
And then there's the parable of the weeds among the wheat.
Oh, that's a good one. It's about how evil can sometimes grow alongside good.
Like in the world, in our lives.
Exactly. But we're not supposed to go on a weed-pulling rampage, trying to eradicate every bit of badness.
So what are we supposed to do?
We're supposed to be patient, to trust that God will sort things out in the end.
Focus on cultivating the good. Let God handle the judgment.
That's the wisdom of the parable. It's a lesson in trusting God's timing, God's plan.
Okay, I'm getting a crash course in parable interpretation here, and I'm
Yeah.
liking it. But we can't forget about the miracles.
Oh, the miracles. Those are always exciting.
It's like Matthew is giving us a glimpse of Jesus's power, his authority over nature, over sickness, over everything.
He is, those miracles are more than just spectacular events.
They're signs of something deeper.
They are. They're pointing to Jesus' divine nature, his compassion, his desire to heal and restore.
So when he heals the sick, it's not just about making them physically well.
It's about demonstrating God's love, God's power to make things whole.
And when he calms the storm, it's not just about showing off.
It's about his authority over the forces of chaos, his ability to bring peace in the midst of turmoil.
And walking on water, that's got to be my favorite.
Mine too. It's just so mind-blowing.
It's like, what? How is that even possible?
But it's a reminder that with God, all things are possible.
That nothing is beyond his reach, beyond his power.
Exactly. The miracles are meant to inspire awe, wonder, and faith.
But even with all those miracles, Jesus still faced opposition, right?
Oh, yeah. He had his fair share of critics.
Especially from the Pharisees, those religious leaders who always seemed to be questioning him.
Those guys, they were sticklers for the rules.
They were all about tradition, about following the letter of the law.
And they saw Jesus as a threat, someone who was challenging their authority, their way of doing things.
So those confrontations were more than just religious debates.
They were clashes of worldviews, of different ways of understanding God, of interpreting scripture.
It was like old versus new, tradition versus innovation.
And those clashes highlight the radical nature of Jesus' message, how it was turning the religious establishment upside down.
And those clashes get even more intense as we approach Passion Week.
Passion Week, the week leading up to Jesus' crucifixion,
It's like a roller coaster of emotions, from the triumphal entry into Jerusalem.
where the crowds are cheering, waving palm branches, hailing Jesus as the Messiah.
To the Last Supper, where he shares a final meal with his disciples.
A poignant moment of fellowship and foreshadowing.
And then the ultimate betrayal by Judas.
The one who sells Jesus out for 30 pieces of silver.
It's heartbreaking, it's intense, it's hard to read.
It is, but it's all part of the plan, the plan that God has been orchestrating since the beginning.
And that plan leads us to the crucifixion.
The most brutal, the most unjust execution in human history.
But Matthew doesn't shy away from the gruesome details.
No, he doesn't. He wants us to see the full extent of Jesus' suffering.
To understand the depth of his sacrifice.
And to realize that even in his death, he's fulfilling prophecy.
Connecting back to that Old Testament story.
Exactly, showing that this is all part of God's grand design.
But the story doesn't end there, does it?
Absolutely not, because Sunday is coming.
Resurrection Sunday. Talk about a plot twist.
The ultimate comeback story.
Matthew describes it all, the empty tomb, the appearances to the disciples, the fear turning to joy.
The doubt transforming into belief.
It's the foundation of the Christian faith, the proof that death doesn't have the final word.
And it sends a ripple effect through history, changing everything.
And from that resurrection comes the Great Commission.
The marching orders for the church.
Go out and make disciples of all nations.
Spread the good news, baptize them, teach them to obey everything Jesus commanded.
It's a call to action, a mission that continues to this day.
And it all started right here in the book of Matthew.
So after this deep dive, this whirlwind tour of Matthew's gospel.
What's the takeaway?
What are we supposed to do with all this information?
Well, for me, it's about recognizing Jesus as the Messiah.
The one who fulfills the promises, who brings hope, who offers salvation.
But it's not just about believing in him, it's about following him.
Walking in his footsteps, living out his teachings, making a difference in the world.
It's about asking ourselves, how can I be more like Jesus today?
How can I love more radically, forgive more freely, serve more selflessly?
Those are the questions that Matthew's gospel leaves us wrestling with.
And that's a journey worth taking, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely, it's the adventure of a lifetime.